Good afternoon, and welcome to our discussion on setting the PAC 2030 agenda, building climate-resilient Caribbean economies. I'm Wazim Maula, and I lead the Caribbean Initiative at the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arch Latin America Center in Washington, D.C. It's great to be here in Guyana, a place that is home to me. And I'd like to first thank everybody that's joining us in person, and also the many of you that are watching virtually as well. You'll be able to find this later on YouTube, also on ACTV, and wherever else you're able to stream those services. Today's discussion comes at a really important time, not just for Guyana, but the wider Caribbean as well. We're facing multiple crises, from climate change to high and volatile energy prices, limited access to finance and capital, and food insecurity, which are just a few. Climate change is not just a short-term problem, but also a long-term problem, having devastating effect on economies. High energy costs undercuts economic competitiveness, and alongside food insecurity limits the purchasing power of citizens and of businesses. And limited access to finance and capital is stalling growth and development in the region, leaving governments debt burdened and businesses unable to borrow at concessionary rates. These challenges have consequences for governments, the business community, but most importantly for citizens in the Caribbean. The small sizes and natures of Caribbean economies, their open-facing economies, tells us that these challenges cannot be addressed in a silo. Regional collaboration and partnerships around the world are crucial not just to the region's survival, but also its prosperity. This brings us to our conversation today, PAC 2030, or otherwise known as the US Caribbean Partnership to Address the Climate Crisis 2030. PAC 2030 is a flagship policy of the United States to the Caribbean, and it's something that we at the Atlantic Council have been working on since its inception. We were in Los Angeles at the 9th Summit of the Americas when it was announced by US Vice President Kamala Harris, and we quickly put together a report last year on how to implement PAC 2030. We then launched a new PAC 2030 working group that looks at how to ensure that PAC 2030 is both contextualized to the needs of the region, but also services the US Caribbean partnership and relationship. And in January, at the end of January, we will launch a new report that looks at how we can set the PAC 2030 agenda over a longer period. This year, we also put together the PAC 2030 Climate Resilient Clean Energy Summit in the Bahamas on the sidelines of VP Harris's visit and meetings with Caribbean leaders there. We worked with a variety of stakeholders across government, civil society, and the business community to make sure that we can turn PAC 2030's ideas into a reality. Simply, at the Atlantic Council, we see the benefits of PAC 2030, but we also understand that there's much more to be done. This brings us to our conversation today, because while the ideas of PAC 2030 can formulate in Washington, in think tanks, it's really here on the ground where implementation occurs. It's important to put regional perspectives at the forefront of not just PAC 2030, but any policy that comes into the region. So for our conversation today, we'll talk about some of the PAC 2030 successes and what more can be done. We'll also look at some of the challenges facing the Caribbean and what strategy the region itself has for its own prosperity. And then we'll look at how PAC 2030 can strengthen US-Caribbean relations over the long term. To help us with this conversation, we have three distinguished speakers with us. First, we have US Ambassador to Guyana, Nicole Theriot. Ambassador, thank you for joining us, and glad that you're finally here in Guyana. We had spoken, I guess, a couple of months ago before you had departed, but it's good to see you here in person. Ambassador has a wealth of experience, including serving as Consul General in Karachi, Pakistan, and Deputy Chief of Mission in Haiti. She's also served as Director of Immigration and Visa Security at the National Security Council at the White House, and has served as Senior Advisor in a variety of government positions. Next, we have with us Foreign Secretary Robert Prasad from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation here in Guyana. Foreign Secretary Prasad has served as Minister of Agriculture and Minister of Natural Resources and Environment. He has an extensive experience in foreign relations, including serving as co-chair of the U.S. Caribbean High-Level Action Committee on Food Security, and as a regional thought leader on a variety of issues. Foreign Secretary, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Finally, we have Enrica Singh, who's a program manager for sustainable development in the CARICOM Secretariat, and it's always great when we have the Secretariat with us. Enrica holds degrees from the University of West Indies and the University of London, and at the Secretariat is responsible for coordination against environmental challenges and leading technical aspects of environmental partnerships. So with this great group of speakers, I want to kick it off just going down the line, starting with you, Ambassador. Since the Summit of the Americas, a little more than a year ago, can you share some of the successes of PAC 2030, and also can you talk a little bit about what PAC 2030 is, what is it designed to cover, and maybe how has that evolved since Vice President Harris has announced it?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I want to thank Atlantic Council for hosting this important event. The issue of the climate crisis and our actions through PACC 2030 could not be more timely. Recognizing the urgency of this issue, at the Summit of the Americas in June 2020, as Wasem said, the Biden-Harris administration launched PACC 2030. The idea of this initiative is that it will serve to catalyze U.S. Caribbean cooperation to address the climate crisis and enhance the Caribbean's energy security. Many nations in the Caribbean have set very bold and ambitious renewable energy targets, and the United States sees itself as a partner in that. We stand ready to provide technical and resource assistance to help them achieve their goals. In fact, since the beginning of this administration, the State Department increased climate resilience and clean energy funding in the Caribbean nearly threefold. Through PACC 2030, we continue to support our Caribbean neighbors to strengthen their energy security and enhance their adaptation and resilience to climate change events. You asked about what PACC 2030 actually is. Well, it's 4 pillars. The first is improving access to development financing. The second is facilitating clean energy project development and investment. The third is food security and enhancing local capacity building, and that is where Guyana has been a true leader amongst other areas. And fourth, deepening collaboration with our Caribbean partners, which is a given. We want PACC 2030 to be a valuable forum to discuss all of these topics, and we're confident that bringing these topics under the umbrella of PACC 2030 will complement our goals and pave the way to getting real results, because we can talk about this all we want to, but if there aren't real results, it's not going to help anyone. So that's incredibly important to us. We want to be able to show real tangible results as a result of PACC 2030. So through PACC 2030, we've launched several new programs to improve financing and engagement with the private sector. This includes the Caribbean Climate Investment Program, or CCIP, for which USAID provided an initial $20 million investment, and they are providing financial and technical assistance and business development services to enterprises deploying technologies in renewable energy, energy efficiency, and climate adaptation by mobilizing private finance and private sector-led actions. I would note that the IDB and Caribbean Development Bank are also strengthening cooperation in the region, along with the Biden-Harris administration's $2 billion request to Congress to boost concessional finance. Now, that's just a request at this point, but that would be incredibly helpful to what we're trying to achieve. We are also hoping to announce additional pledges to the Green Climate Fund in Dubai at COP28. In addition, just a couple more things that we're doing under PACC 2030, Secretary Blinken announced a $5.3 million USAID Regional Food Security Program. It's called CAPA, the Caribbean Agricultural Productivity Improvement Activity, and it works to improve food production technology, promote sustainable farming practices, and smart climate practices. And it also is promoting market access for small farmers. USAID also launched a $4 million program for sustainable financing for regional conservation that provides support and development and develops financial mechanisms for payments for ecosystem services, conservation funds, and carbon credit facilities, which is of interest here in Guyana for sure. Another new PACC 2030 program I'm excited about is the Farmer to Farmer program. I am a huge fan as a U.S. diplomat of people-to-people ties and enhancing those between our countries. And what this does is it brings U.S. farmers who are experts in very specific niche areas of renewable energy, food security, farming, to come to Guyana to work for a 6 to 8 week period with Guyanese farmers to help them do better in whatever area that this person is an expert in. And we have this, it's a really cool program. And we have it in Guyana, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, and Guatemala. And it's going to focus on climate adaptation and resilience. And we're currently developing the specific interventions that are going to be used. And there's so much more, but I will be quiet because I've talked too much.
No, you, the fact that you spoke a lot means that you're doing a lot, which is a good sign, right? So I think, that's exciting, right? Thinking about what you're working on with farmers, civil society, private sector, but also top to bottom, right? Working at high levels with governments, but also, like you said, people-to-people ties. Foreign Secretary, I want to turn to you now, right? We've heard a little bit about PACC 2030, Now, how is PAC 2030 influencing the US Guyana relationship? What impact is it having? And not just on Guyana, but maybe even on the wider Caribbean. You've been part of many of these discussions. We'd love to get your take.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the panel, and this distinguished panel. Welcome, Madam Ambassador. It's our first public forum together, so this is the first this afternoon. I also want to thank the Atlantic Council for not only hosting this engagement, but also for its sustained advocacy and ensuring that the Caribbean and issues of importance to the Caribbean gets the deserved attention. PAC 2030, I think, would go down as a defining moment in the relationship between the United States and the Caribbean, and particularly CARICOM. When leaders went into the Summit of Americas in June last year, particularly from the Caribbean and the CARICOM region, they went in with a level of low expectation, in the sense that the US has, in recent years, preceding that summit, has not given the region, and particularly the CARICOM area, the deserved attention. And it was felt that perhaps other areas of the world and other issues were consuming and taking up the bulk of the US's of attention. And we went to that summit hoping that perhaps this can be an opportunity, but we went with low expectation. But all that changed when we saw both President Biden and Vice President Harris decided that they would have dedicated sessions with CARICOM leaders, Caribbean leaders, to speak to the issues that concern us, that affect us, that have been affecting us, and certainly affect us today, and some of the issues going forward. And coming out of that particular high-level interaction, leaders and the region as a whole felt a sense of renewal in our relationship, and that perhaps now the United States would be giving due attention to the region, and in a sincere and also in a sustained way. Because we can come out of a summit and say we pledge the following, and then until the next summit, then we continue to pledge again, and in between summits, we hardly do the hard work. Unlike that, we've seen since this summit, we started a number of high-level interactions where we've pulled out 3 particular areas. We looked at the issue of food security, we looked at the issue of energy, and we looked at the issue of financing, and a lot of work is done. Then the PAC 2030 has been fully evolved. Then the work of those 3 high-level committees then were subsumed and then brought into the framework of the full 4 pillars as described by the ambassador. That certainly showed the US's commitment to engaging and working with the Caribbean. And our response to has been proactive too, because it takes 2 to tango. And in the discussions that we've had, it has been one in which there's been sustained engagement, sustained focus on delivering results, but also looking at how it is that we can use this as a mechanism going forward in terms of developing and harnessing and shaping a new relationship between the US and CARICOM, and more so in terms of Guyana, because we've also been one of the leads on one of those pillars or one of those areas. So to answer your question, this PAC 2030 initiative will certainly redefine and certainly re-energize the relationship between the US and the Caribbean region.
No, thank you. I think I love redefine, re-energized relationship, seeing that moment at the Summit of the Americas as a defining moment of the US-Caribbean relationship. You know, it makes me think of 2 things. One is small states really can have influence, especially in forums like the Summit of the Americas and consistent engagement with the United States and its other partners. And 2, it seems based on all the deliverables that Ambassador mentioned with regards to PAC 2030 and some of your comments on that sustained engagement, it explains why PAC 2030 can be so contextualized to the things that the region feels like it needs for its own prosperity. So we talked a little about PAC 2030, but want to drill down a little bit more on the actual challenges within PAC 2030 across climate, energy, and food that is facing the Caribbean. And Enrica, I'm looking at you, you know, you focus so much on environmental challenges, so much on climate challenges in the Caribbean. Can you give us a broad overview on what those challenges look like for the rest of the Caribbean and Guyana included?
Okay, so again, let me also add my thanks to the Atlantic Council for including the CARICOM Secretariat in the distinguished panel. So I'm just fresh out of my ministerial meeting ahead of COP28, and so I should be able to sing this like a hymn. But however, going into COP, we've crystallized a number of priorities for the region, and without you know, belaboring the point, the issue of adaptation to climate change for this region is critical. We see climate change as an existential threat to our region, not to both our economies as well as our societies. As we've all said before, we're a number of small island and low-lying coastal developing states with small populations, heavily dependent on our natural resources, which are all very vulnerable to the vagaries of climate. You know, very often we see the images of the huge events, the hurricanes, and we know the intensities and frequencies of hurricanes and, in this region has increased in the last 10 to 15 years. But it doesn't tell the whole picture, because it's not just the hurricanes that impact us. It's the one-off events and the intensity of rainfalls or floods that can bring a society, businesses, a country to a halt. The loss that you suffer in one day's rain can put you back maybe several months. So we're seeing increasing vulnerability to the obvious, which are the big events, but also you will hear us talking a lot about the issue of loss and damage. And that speaks more to the slow onset events and the events that are not so dramatic, and the ones that are creeping up on us, and the ones that we will not be able to adapt. You know, there will come a point where, as a region, we can no longer adapt. And some of those things include, you know, the droughts, and we're seeing this year has been exacerbated by the La Nina event, but long heat spells, so much so that for the first time in the region, you're seeing heat advisories for the elderly and schools and our workmen, and, you know, as we said, our societies. We're having to change. Also, saline intrusion into fresh water, which impacts our agricultural industry, our drinking water, our land, losing their fertility and losing our soil, which impacts agriculture, which impacts housing. Our coral reefs have always been vulnerable to climate change. We're seeing increasing acidification, sea surface temperatures that impact our reef and our coastal ecosystems. And of course, this impacts our fisheries, our tourism. So as a region, we know we are amongst the most vulnerable, together with the other small island developing states. So for this reason, CARICOM and SIDS in general have had a strong voice within the UNFCCC and the climate change discussions, because we have a lot, if not the most, to lose. So
Thank you, Enrica. I mean, I think it's very clear that not only do we have these slow onset events over longer periods and those sudden onset events, those one-off events, but it seems to be intertwined in everything, including food security. And Foreign Secretary, I want to go to you on your take on what are some of those food security challenges here in Guyana and the wider Caribbean. You mentioned Guyana is a leader on food security for the entire region, and just the breadth of the land just tells us that there's so much potential. Can you talk a little bit about some of those challenges?
Well, first of all, it's important for us to understand the reality we're living in. And Latin America and the Caribbean region is one of the most food insecure parts of the world. In fact, 52% of the population, and that was the recent UN's report for 2022, 52% of the Latin American Caribbean population cannot afford what you consider a nutritious meal. And the numbers get even much more worrying in terms of those who perhaps cannot even have access to a meal when they go to bed at night. And it ranges in the millions. And it's not only in the poor areas, even United States itself, that report found, close to 12.8% cannot have access to what is considered a nutritious meal at the end of the day. And so we are dealing with a very stark reality. Sometimes we think other parts of the world are the only ones who are suffering from hunger or are on the brink of starvation or face these tough challenges. But right here in our region, and that reality where you find more than just over half of our entire population cannot have access to a nutritious meal or food or a wholesome diet, is something worrying. But this situation is not as a result of climate. Climate is a major factor in terms of what it disrupts production. It affects, as we heard, what it does to the agricultural land, the availability of irrigation, and we have, in our situation, low-lying, a country below sea level. It affects in terms of drainage and floods and so forth. Yes, it has a very strong impact on food insecurity, but there are also other factors which we have to take into account, and that is what happens globally, outside of our region. And we were all reminded when Russia invaded Ukraine, how an event that took place so far away affected each one of our tables, each one of our plates, what we ate and what we could afford to eat as a result of that act of war that took place so far away. Then we also have issues in terms of access to financing, the vulnerability of the sector, issues of crop insurance, how it is that we can reduce the risk to our farmers or producers in this regard. So all those factors combined are giving rise to a very stark reality, a situation that requires urgent, immediate, sustained, and certainly, in some regards, innovative interventions. And the PACC 2030, as one of the means of addressing this particular crisis, we can call it in our region, I think offers us some solution. It is not the only way, it is not an end-all solution, but certainly it identifies a number of interventions where we can have collaboration between the United States, the CARICOM region, and countries, individual countries within the region, on how it is that we can address some of those constraints, some of those challenges going forward. And take, for instance, the issue of having technology and agricultural technology and food production technology that can deal with the issues of climate change. How it is we can deal with vulnerability, addressing the issues of crop insurance and reducing the risk to our farmers. How it is that we can also improve our farming techniques so that we can improve yield and efficiency. And there have been a number of interventions in terms of how to utilize fertilizer and assisting and training our farmers, and that those interventions have already taken place. Another issue in terms of dealing with logistics. How do we solve the problem of logistics, even within the region? The CARICOM region, we have a soaring food import bill that is going past $5 billion. There's a commitment at CARICOM region to reduce that by 25% by 2025. Within the framework of PACC 2030, those interventions will assist and aid CARICOM in moving in that direction. So we are dealing with a very stark situation. Some of us do not appreciate fully how vulnerable, but also what can be the consequences of not addressing food insecurity. We can have political instability. We can give rise to tensions even across the region. And issues of migration. So there are a number of consequences, there are a number of debilitating effects that can hold back development of our people, development of our region, if we do not address the issues of food security. At the end of the day, a hungry belly cannot function. And a hungry belly sometimes spurns thoughts and action that are not sometimes too to, as it were, productive or can contribute to a society that we want to build, one is stable and prosperous. So the point is that we must see this situation with alarm. We must treat it as a crisis, and PACC 2030 could not have come at a right time, at a right moment, in allowing and in galvanizing and assisting in giving us collectively, the Caribbean region, the resources, partnering with the United States in addressing this crisis that is upon us.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. Really comprehensive answer. I mean, my main takeaway from it is you have to strengthen the entire value chain, from production to processing to distribution to marketing. And not only that, because we are in the Caribbean, you need to make each part of it resilient. So I think it's a monumental effort, but we have policies like PACC 2030 that are hopefully there to help, which takes me to you, Ambassador. Hearing about some of the challenges that America spoke about, some of the challenges that Foreign Secretary spoke about, how is that influencing PACC 2030's makeup? And then how can Caribbean countries, not just the governments, but private sector as well, civil society, take advantage of PACC 2030 and actually help with the implementation as well?
Thank you for that question. I think my colleagues laid out beautifully what the challenges are. America referring to the different climate events and crises, and of course, Mr. Prasad talking about the external shocks that have resounding impact here in the Caribbean. And I'm a native of New Orleans, Louisiana, so I am no stranger to climate events that massively impact people's lives. So believe me, that vulnerability, I'm with you, I feel it. And I think here in the Caribbean, I think we did miss one challenge, which was COVID, which also massively disrupted the supply chain, the global supply chain. So again, I mean, all of these things that we have no control over that are impacting the Caribbean that is already so vulnerable given its situation. But I would say that one of, and this is going to sound small and unimportant, but I can't tell you how critically important it is. One of the things that we're doing in PACC 2030 all over the Caribbean is we're partnering with NGOs. We're partnering with small, grassroots, non-governmental organizations to address, both at a multilateral and a bilateral level, increasing resilience among the people who are the most vulnerable. Just here in Guyana, for example, we have 2 grants that we've awarded. One is specifically to women, women who are looking to work, develop businesses and work in climate resilience. We also have another that provides economic opportunities to women and the underprivileged in certain communities that don't receive these opportunities very often. And the idea is to make these communities more climate resilient. And we're giving, like I said, similar grants out throughout the Caribbean. And I think so often we deal with each other at these high levels. Foreign Secretary Prasad sits on a very high-level committee with the Western Hemisphere Assistant Secretary Brian Nichols and I believe the Foreign Secretary of the Dominican Republic to talk about food security, and that is critically important for guiding policy and where we should be going. But you also have to go down to the grassroots to work with the people who are actually most affected by these things. And that's what we're trying to do as well. So in PACC 2030, we're trying to span the divide between multilateral and bilateral activities, but also all aspects of the population, from the policymakers to the people most significantly impacted on an existential level.
Thank you. I mean, this goes back to your point on people-to-people ties. And I'll be honest that when we thought about PACC 2030 in our own work, it wasn't exactly something that we put a lot of emphasis on. So when you see our report in January and you see that wording, people-to-people ties, yeah, I'll definitely make sure to cite this conversation. Also just want to plug, you talked about women and underprivileged populations. Earlier today, we had a Caribbean Gender Empowerment Forum with specifically a panel on how climate change is disproportionately affecting women and girls. So for those of you that have not seen it, you can also find that on YouTube for the Atlantic Council event with UN Women. Foreign Secretary, I want to go to you and, as we were thinking about this event, right, and we were doing all this work on PACC 2030, something in the back of my mind kept pulling at me, and I was thinking about President Ali's speech at the Energy Expo earlier this year, and he was talking about LCDS 2030 and being this not just a Guyana strategy, but a global strategy. And when I look at LCDS, when I look at PACC 2030, I see a lot of similarities. And I wanted to kind of get your perspective on what those similarities might be and how maybe they can even be complementary of each other.
I think that's an important observation you've made. And even when we were going through the proposal and when the United States sought our ideas or comments on the original PACC 2030, in our response, we definitely try to incorporate some of the existing initiatives and interventions and proposals that we've had. And a few of those came directly out of the LCDS. So what we now have is a regional document, a plan working with the United States, but also that has some reference point to ongoing work where we can have a complementary approach. So rather than us moving in divergent area to address the same issue, let us look how it is we can complement. Because we have issues of resources, we have issues of capacity, and also we have the urgency of it. We can't wait, we can't do things, on a basis where we do some today, we do some later. We have to deal with all of the issues at the same time, simultaneously. And so the key elements of those where we can see similarity is the emphasis of how it is we can make our activities, particularly, say, food production and related activities, be much more climate resilient. And so you'll find that a lot of the elements on the pillar that we have on that pillar 3, that look at food security and climate resilience, there are a lot of elements that go directly to the low carbon development strategy, how it is that we can deal with issues of adaptation in terms of making our farmers, our productive capacity, and dealing our communities and even our country much more climate resilient. Another element too is the issue of financing. One of the pillars there is looking at access to financing. What the LCDS does is that it comes up with a model of how it is we can generate and raise the financing. And that is where Forest Climate Services, where as a country, we've been able to mobilize in the first instance in our 2009 LCDS, in the first edition, working with the Norwegian government, we've been able to sell our Forest Climate Services through a bilateral arrangement to $250 million US. Now, in this current arrangement in the LCDS 2030, whereby it takes into account other developments, including oil and gas, we've now been able to enter into a partnership with HES, whereby we'll be able to earn the country a minimum of $750 million US. And so that's the way in which we were innovative in raising the financing so that we can address the challenges that come about as a result of climate change, but also to allow us to deal with the issues of the economic, infrastructural, and social issues of our country. So there's a nexus, there's a complementary relationship between PACC 2030 and certainly the LCDS from Guyana's standpoint is being reinforced by the work that we do with PACC 2030 in the wider Caribbean region. But also, we would want to offer this to as a model, as the President had proposed, for the wider world, but also for the region, that whatever approach that we're taking, whatever strategies, whatever interventions that we may make within PACC 2030 or even outside of PACC 2030, a good reference point would be the LCDS 2030.
No, thank you. And I think it tells me no need to reinvent the wheel, right? Everything can work in complements. And an LCDS or a PACC 2030 that's regional or even global, America, that makes me think of you at the Secretariat. It's probably, if this were to happen, it's probably going to be your job. But want to talk a little bit about, a big part of PACC 2030 is strengthening local capacity, not just at government level, but at regional organization level. And I want to hear from you on what utility can PACC 2030 and broader U.S. partnership provide to regional organizations. CARICOM, yes, but thinking of CARILEC, CCRE, CDB, the 5 Cs, the whole lot.
So what I would preface my intervention by saying in the lead up to the Summit of the Americas, there had been a move between the CARICOM Secretariat on behalf of the region and US government, and in particular USAID, to strengthen the way we were cooperating. And there were a lot of bilateral visits, a lot of discussions. And so when you had PACC 2030, what then happened is that there were areas of cooperation that were already existing, and PACC 2030 allowed us to focus and align. And what that has the benefit of doing is basically allocating much needed resources to critical areas that have been agreed by both parties that are important to the region. And you're asking me specifically about the regional organizations. And the US via USAID has done tremendous work with our regional institutions in the area of early warning systems. You always hear the CARICOM in particular being, the data challenge that we have. And this is something that has been dealt with head-on through interventions with our Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology and our Caribbean Meteorological Organization, where we have, through investment with USAID, we have early warning systems for several sectors, including agriculture, health, tourism, and we've been able to expand it into other areas. We're doing now sea surface temperature, and we're doing sargassum, and a number of things. We've also had a lot of intervention with CCRI and CARILEC as it relates to energy and energy financing, getting private sector more involved in increasing the uptake of renewable energy options, making more renewable energy technologies available in the region, and very importantly as well, work with CDEMA, and which is our Caribbean Disaster Emergency Agency, and strengthening the ability of the region to respond to disaster, but also to prepare and to build the resilience of local communities to respond. So what we've done after PACC, it helped us to focus and drill down a little bit in terms of what the interventions will be able to achieve. Most recently, we had an engagement where we spoke about the new electric vehicles policy that we've approved for CARICOM. And we've brought it to the attention of the group from USAID. So, it's things like that where we're able to identify the real needs in the region, align them to the 4 pillars, and therefore we'll see, to be able to allow resources, both human, financial, technical, to be allocated to address the issue.
No, those are all excellent points, and building up regional capacity seems to be the way forward, right? I mean, I think when we look at our work at the Caribbean Initiative at the Atlantic Council, we have certain objectives, yes, but the underlying mission is what are the recommendations you can make to ensure that the Caribbean is a self-sufficient region? And when you think about that, it has to start not just with governments, but also the capacity of regional organizations as well. So in our remaining time, Enrique, I'm gonna start with you again and then come back this way, is, my question is, if we're here a year from now, what does success look like for PACC 2030 from your standpoint?
Are we talking a year, or are we talking more than a year?
I mean, we can go longer, but I asked the same question in the previous forum this morning. They were like, no, I can't think all the way to 2030. I got to think for a year. So okay. I had to change it.
So in a year, I'm hoping that we have. Let me start where you ended on the issue of finance. I'm going to read the quotation from my ministers here. I walked with it. Sorry. The issue of access to finance, and this is one of the pillars of PACC 2030, is critical for this region. And we're talking about finance that is, quote unquote, predictable, affordable, sustainable, scalable. And I'm hoping that there has been a lot of work that we've been doing in the region. Foreign Secretary mentioned some of it. We've been doing a lot of innovative things with disaster bonds and disaster clauses and nature-based solutions. But we've also been doing a lot of work through the Bridgetown Initiative to look at restructuring of the international financial institutions. And you might ask, why is this important to the climate change discussion? But it's inextricably linked, because we cannot always be borrowing, at rates that are not beneficial to us to respond to disasters every year. And the fact that our fiscal space is so small and we have an international financial system that is not necessarily responsive to our vulnerabilities is a critical issue for us. So I'm hoping that in a year, within that pillar, that we see some sort of progress, because the US is one of the key partners in this area in achieving reform of the international financial institution. I'm also hoping we will have progress in our 25 by 25. And that we're able to continue our good work that we're doing with improving the data and informatics of the region to allow us to go after the climate finance, because in order to access climate finance, you have to prove via data that you have a viable case, which we do, but as I said, we have structural issues with data. So just 3 things for 1 year.
Perfect. No, I like ambition. Foreign Secretary, same question.
Well, it's important that we enhance the political will, because without political will, we will not be able to achieve the results set out or envisaged through the PACC 2030 program. Secondly, is how it is that we can broaden the partnership, because without partnership, we cannot make the type of progress we want on all the pillars, on all the goals that we've set ourselves in that regard. And then thirdly, I think if we can see within the coming year immediate deliverables in areas where we can, the phrase that is always bandied about low-hanging fruits. So let us identify those low-hanging fruits and see in the various pillars what we can do. But underneath all of that, and I think which we must not omit, is that we must constantly ensure that our region remains a zone of peace. And I'm going to link that into how it is we can ensure that all the work that we're doing PACC 2030, all the other initiatives that we're undertaking, if we have disruption of peace within this region, within this zone, it can undermine that. So we must see all the linkages, how one can impact the other, when we talk about food security and energy security, what happened in one part of the world affects another part. Right here, we must ensure if we want the type of results in a year, 2 years, taken to 2030, there must be a sustained and focused attention in terms of ensuring that our region remains a zone of peace. And that's where the United States becomes a very important partner, a very important ally in maintaining that, so it can give us the types of results that we want out of this initiative and other initiatives in the coming year and in the years to come.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. I mean, great point. Zone of peace, enhance political will, broaden partnership, and have immediate deliverables. Find what those low-hanging fruits are. And Ambassador, I'm going to end with you. What does success look like? What can success look like if we took a year out?
So I think what's really important and unique about PACC 2030 is that we're sort of doing it differently. We're addressing these incredibly important issues both multilaterally and bilaterally. We're doing it with individual countries, but we're also bringing in the IFIs, the International Financial Institutions, the multilateral organizations like the Organization of American States. We're bringing in the private sector, we're bringing in NGOs. When everyone is invested in getting these positive outcomes, you're so much more likely to have success. So I think that's a really important part of it. I know we all want to do the right thing, but getting to the right thing is often more difficult. And I would say I've been with the State Department for 25 years, and I would say that I'm incredibly impressed with the amount of, as we say in the US, we're putting our money where our mouth is. We are saying that PACC 2030 is important and our relationship with the Caribbean is important, and we're following that up with the financing and the funding. Just a perfect example of that is, the Export-Import Bank of the United States and the government of Guyana signed an MOU in July 2022, to explore options for using EXIM financing for direct loans, loan guarantees, and insurance products totaling up to $2 billion. That doesn't happen every day in the U.S. government, but that is just one, and you've heard me mention multiple other programs that we're doing, both with individual countries and multilaterally. But I also think, I guess I have a theme. What's really important about what we're doing is we're not saying, as the United States government, this is what needs to happen. What we're doing is we're coming to the individual countries and the regional organizations. CARICOM is incredibly important to us. We just had a USAID team here last week who spent the week sitting down with CARICOM. We are listening. We are here for you to tell us what needs to be done. These are your countries, these are your populations, and so we're working so hard to tailor what we're doing to what the true needs are. And that's really the bottom line. We are listening. We are here to help, but we need to know what you need in terms of priority, especially. Prioritizing is incredibly important because we've just talked about all these challenges. And we want to help, and we want to have tangible results and impact a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. But in order to do that, we need to know what your priorities are and how we can help. And hopefully some of these projects are addressing those.
Perfect. Well, seems like inclusion of multilaterals, the IFIs, private sector, setting PACC 2030 up for success. Love the listening mode. I think that's probably going to be crucial for PACC 2030. We're out of time, but I just want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day. I know it's a busy week here in Guyana. Well, it's always a busy week now in Guyana, but taking time out of your day to spend time talking with us. I'd like to thank all of our in-person audience and also our virtual audience. I remember you can watch this later on YouTube as well. And just definitely want to thank my colleagues at the Atlantic Council that helped put this together. Enrique, Valentina Satter, Martine, and Iveta in the back. All I have to do was stand up here and talk to you all. They put everything together. So thank you everybody for joining us, and hopefully we'll be back in Guyana soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.